Chapter 45-53. After Qin Emo said that, Enchanting was still unfazed. "Thank you, Uncle Qin." Qin Emo treated him as though he was a man. He put his arm around the young man's thin shoulders and said with a hint of a smile, "We're a family now. Don't call me uncle and add my surname to make us seem distant, don't you think?" Enchanting smiled faintly again. "Uncle. Good boy." Qin Emo patted his head. "Rest for a while. Your auntie said she wants to bring you around. You've been busy for the past few days. Let's relax together. You might not have the time to do this in a couple of days." Enchanting nodded. Qin Emo smiled again and left. When he returned to the bedroom, Hehuan was still asleep. Qin Mo was a little tired from all the work he had done for the past few days, so he laid down beside her. Hehuan actually woke up. She opened her eyes in a daze and leaned over. "Where did you go?" Qin Mo rested his head on her pillow and smiled. "I went to see the kids." He lowered his head and looked at his little wife in his arms. He caressed her hair and said in a gentler voice, "Sleep for a while more. I haven't had a good night's sleep for days." Hehuan nodded, closed her eyes, and went to sleep. She had a dream. She dreamt that she and Qin Mo were old but very happy. When she woke up, he was beside her. However, his black hair and handsome face did not seem like it was in the dream. Hehuan woke up from her nap. Her voice and expression were very gentle. She leaned on his shoulder and said softly, "Enchanting is a good kid, Qin Mo. I'm just worried." Qin Mo still had his head lowered and looked at Hehuan. After a while, he smiled. "Why? You've only met him once and you're already feeling sorry for him." Hehuan looked at him. "Qin Mo." His tone became more serious as he lowered his voice. "Enchanting is a good kid. But you said that they're still young and they might not be able to be together forever, right?" Hehuan bit her lip and said softly after a long while, "I guess so." Qin Mo lay down, closed his eyes, and then slowly said, "Didn't you say that Hehuan is too tired? Enchanting can be considered a successor. He can handle it." Hehuan was surprised and shocked. She stared at him in disbelief. Qin Mo smiled. "What's wrong?" Hehuan covered her eyes. "How could you be willing? Mom and Dad, as well as Qin Chen and Qin Mu, how could they be willing?" Qin Mo laughed. "First of all, you didn't object to it. Why would they object? Everyone has their own business, and Enchanting is loyal to the Qin family, so the shares will always be in Hehuan's hands. However, if she marries Yi Xiangnan, then the management of King Entertainment will be entirely in Enchanting's hands. Of course, if Hehuan marries Enchanting, then that's another matter." He paused for a moment. "This is my compensation for him. Living with the Qin family since he was young wasn't easy. Enchanting had to endure all the hardships that Qin Mo had suffered. 3 years later. If they weren't suitable in the future, Enchanting would suffer a huge emotional trauma." Hehuan said in a low voice, "If it were me, I'd rather choose a more ordinary life. But he's Enchanting, an ambitious man. Moreover, he likes Hehuan." Qin Mo smiled gently. "This love is enough to support him until he becomes the real boss of King." Hehuan said in a low voice, "But I still find it unbelievable. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update." Chapter 45-54. Qin Mo smiled and pinched her nose. "Alright, don't be surprised. It's almost 5:00. Mrs. Qin, you should take the kids out for a walk. You promised Enchanting, didn't you?" He Huan nodded. Yes. Then, she got up and tidied up a little. By the time she came out, Qin Mo was ready. The two kids were even more agile when they went downstairs. Yi Huan stood neatly by Shinting's side, looking very cute. As Yi Huan and Qin Mo walked downstairs, she couldn't help but whisper to Qin Mo, "Isn't it too unkind to let Shinting take care of Yi Huan?" Qin Mo smiled. "He's enjoying it." Yi Huan couldn't bear it anymore. She looked at her husband and said, "Are all the men in the Qin family perverts? Why do you like them? They were raised since they were young." Qin Mo smiled again. "Why? Are you unhappy with the current situation?" Yi Huan snorted. "How can we be the same? We've known each other since we were young. How can you?" Since it was time to go downstairs, Yi Huan shut her mouth. Qin Mo chuckled softly. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Yi Huan couldn't take it anymore. "Qin Mo, don't go too far." Qin Mo was still smiling happily. He walked to Shinting. "Your aunt said I went too far. She's probably in a bad mood because she's angry." Yi Huan didn't dare to be like this in front of the kids. She glared at Qin Mo and then looked at Shinting with a gentle expression. "Don't listen to him. I'm fine." Qin Mo chuckled. "Mrs. Qin, have you learned how to change your face?" Yi Huan was furious. She glared at Qin Mo again. Mr. Qin didn't feel any pressure, but Shinting smiled. Gu Nianshan's smile was so charming that little Yi Huan, who was standing next to him, could not help but drool. Shinting lowered his head and asked softly, "What happened?" Little Yi Huan raised her little face and said pitifully, "Gij, you're so good-looking." Shinting sighed. "It's brother Shinting." Qin Yi Huan was still very stubborn. "Brother." Shinting couldn't help but ask, "Why brother?" 2 words are easy, but 4 words are so tiring. Yi Huan looked at him with a curious gaze, her big eyes sparkling. Shinting smiled. "So that's how it is." Sure enough, you can't use normal thinking to judge a 7-year-old child. A trace of warmth slid through his heart, and he couldn't help but reach out to touch the little fellow's little head. His voice actually carried a trace of hoarseness that didn't match his age. "Then do you like Big Brother?" "I like it," little Yi Huan said and then hugged his arm, looking as cute as a koala bear. Qin Mo smiled and walked out with Yi Huan. He said in a low voice, "Shinting, bring Yi Huan to the car." Shinting looked down and rubbed the little fellow's little head. "Okay, let's go." Yi Huan hugged his arm and skipped to catch up with him. When they got into the car, the little fellow also stuck to her big brother. Yi Huan must have been lonely for a long time. Yi Huan sat in the front seat and noticed the situation in the back seat. She couldn't help but think to herself that if her body allowed it, she should have another child. No matter how good Shinting was, he might still be Yi Huan's husband in the future. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-55. She had always wanted Yi Huan to have a brother or sister. Suddenly, she understood Qin Mo's way of doing things. A person who grew up with Yi Huan was indeed more suitable than Yi Xiangnan to be Yi Huan's husband. Yi Huan pursed her lips and took one last look at Qin Mo. Then, she said in a low voice, "Perhaps this arrangement is good." "My selfishness," he said, with a smile and a hint of meaning. Yi Huan rolled her eyes at him and said, "Please be more serious in the future." Qin Mo smiled and didn't say anything else. He started the car. The car slowly drove away and went straight to a plaza at the highest end of B City. They had a meal first and then strolled around to aid digestion. Shinting followed beside them, holding little Yi Huan's hand. No one would suspect that they were not a family. It was very natural. Because they had to pick out clothes for Shinting, they went straight to a fashion brand. Because it was men's clothes, Yi Huan and Yi Huan sat and rested while Qin and Mo picked out clothes for Shinting. Shinting was very good-looking and looked like a hanger no matter what he wore. The brand was not bad, so Qin and Mo was not stingy with money. He picked out a few sets for winter and spring and asked the staff to send them to the villa. Later, they went to a few more stores and carefully picked out some household items for Shinting. In fact, Qin and Mo might not usually do these things, but Shinting was different. He had to let Shinting have a sense of belonging to a family. At the same time, such kindness was also a kind of pressure and burden. But Shinting could bear it. This was something Qin and Mo naturally knew. Of course, Shinting used his own card because Qin and Mo had registered a credit card for him to use. It was about 10 million yuan a year. Other than school fees and daily living expenses, he could invest the rest of the money. Shinting already knew a little, and Qin and Mo emphasized on teaching him. With Shinting's aptitude, he was able to draw inferences very quickly. Hence, Shinting paid for little Yi Huan's clothes, toys, and school fees. Even when he was abroad, he would send clothes back to her. After shopping for Shinting's clothes, Shinting carried Yi Huan to the toy store and bought her a small water gun. It was a small water gun. Qin and Mo was very calm, but Yi Huan was shocked that her little girl was playing with a water gun. She wanted to say something, but Yi Huan was in Shinting's arms. She was holding the water gun and pretending to shoot. She was very happy. What else could she say? Qin and Mo reached out and hugged his wife, telling her to calm down. If he wasn't calm, what else could he do? After all, Yi Huan was playing so happily. What else could Yi Huan say? She just let her be. After returning home, Shinting brought Yi Huan to her bedroom to take care of her. Yi Huan entered the room and looked at Qin and Mo. Aren't you being too lenient? Shinting is very outstanding, but he's a child himself. Can he take care of a child? Qin and Mo laughed. Why not? Don't I still have you? Yi Huan glared at him and sighed. Look at you. Now that you've given up control, there's no room for me to interfere. You'll have to give Yi Huan a bath later. Shinting can't do it. Qin and Mo laughed again. Yi Huan glared at him. Easy for you to say. Yi Huan said that she wants to be independent now that she's grown up. She wants to bathe herself. Only then did Qin and Mo find it interesting. He touched his head and asked, did she say that? Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone is the fastest to update. Chapter 45-56. Only then did Qin and Mo find it interesting. He touched his head and asked, did she say that? She even said that brother Shinting taught her, Yi Huan said unhappily and glanced at her husband unhappily. Qin and Mo smiled and suddenly pulled her to sit on the sofa. He made her a cup of fruit tea and said in a low voice, before Yi Huan turns 12, she will do whatever she wants, just like before. Yi Huan was stunned for a moment and then suddenly understood. She exclaimed softly, is this Shinting's condition? Yes. Qin and Mo said indifferently and then looked at Yi Huan. Both parties are equal in the contract. Yi Huan, this will never change. Yi Huan didn't say anything and just sat quietly. After a while, she looked up at her husband. Qin and Mo, I just think that Yi Huan still has many years to grow up, at least 10 years before we know what she is thinking. After all, she is still so young. I'm afraid that Shinting will have nothing in the future. Men either have a career or have love. They can't have it both ways, you know. Qin Emo fooled his wife to his heart's content. He Huan wasn't an idiot. How could she not know what he was thinking? She snorted. Qin Emo, what about you? Your career is not bad now. Do you have to sacrifice love? He smiled. We are an old couple. Love is nothing. Besides, are we the same as others? He Huan glanced at him and said, shameless. What else could she do? He was actually right. Perhaps the best way to let Shinting integrate into the Qin family was to marry Yi Huan. Yi Huan sighed and shook her head. I can't manage it. Qin Emo smiled. Shinting will only manage it for 3 years. You have to continue managing it for the next few years. When Shinting comes back, Yi Huan will be 13 or 14 years old. He suddenly remembered that Yi Huan was probably going to go abroad at that time. He couldn't help but sigh softly. Then, he said to Yi Huan in a low voice, time passes very quickly. Yi Huan has grown up. We're probably getting old too. Even if I want to be shameless to you in the future, I probably won't be able to say it. Yi Huan was speechless. She wanted to say something but gave up. She yawned and said, I want to sleep. Qin Emo immediately expressed that he was also sleepy. Yi Huan looked at him and asked suspiciously, you don't have a job? Mr. Qin's expression was very strange. Then, he reached out and pinched her cheek. Little heartless thing. Yi Huan looked at him. I've worked hard for you for so many days. Even a cow needs to rest and feed it grass. Qin Emo said in a low voice. Yi Huan smiled. Then I'll feed you some grass later. He reached out and rubbed her hair. All right, take a shower. I'll go check on the children. He nodded. Okay, I'll wait for you. So good. Qin Emo smiled. His voice was slightly hoarse with a smile. Yi Huan blushed. Then, she bit her lip and said in a low voice, that's not what I meant. Then what do you mean? He chuckled. You can tell me properly. Yi Huan was speechless. President Qin was satisfied. Then, he went to the children's room to check on Yi Huan. Yi Huan was still swaying on the pony. Shinting was sitting on the carpet beside her. He was reading a book while accompanying the little girl. The scene was super heartwarming. Qin Emo raised his hand to look at the time. It was still early. Moreover, Yi Huan was not in school. The two children hit it off, so he let them spend a little more time together. Like new wife number 1, husband, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, husband, addicted to spoiling. My mobile phone updates the fastest. Chapter 45-57. Qin Emo raised his hand to look at the time. It was still early, and Yi Huan wasn't in school. The two kids hit it off, so he let them spend a little more time together. He had come in quietly, and he had left quietly. In the children's room, it was quiet. Yi Huan was on the pony, holding a water gun and shooting. Shinting would occasionally look up at the cute little girl. Back then, Qin Emo had shown him Yi Huan's long hair, which made her look like a doll. When he saw Yi Huan, he was a little shocked. She looked like a little boy, but she was still unbelievably beautiful. Shinting really wanted to hug her more. In the past, he never knew that he would like dolls, but he restrained himself no matter how much he liked them. It wasn't just because he didn't want to scare the doll. Another reason was that this doll wasn't completely his now. She almost belonged to Yi Xiangnan. Even if he had the right to compete, he knew that he was still very far away from that step. Shinting was a very practical boy, and he was always very clear-headed. He accompanied Yi Huan, and suddenly put down the book in his hand. He smiled and asked, "You don't like your hair before?" "I don't like it anymore," Yi Huan said in a childish voice as she rocked the pony. She looked indescribably cute. Shinting smiled lightly again, and reached out to tug at her hair. "You don't want to wear a little skirt anymore?" Yi Huan shook the pony again and again. The water gun in her hand was no longer biu-biu. She kept looking at Shinting, frowning as if she was thinking about something. Shinting patiently waited for her to arrive. Finally, little Yi Huan's tightly pursed lips opened her mouth. She seemed to be very cautious, but at the same time, she seemed to be sharing a secret with her best friend. "Because I think Big Brother Nan likes girls like Aunt Chin. Shinting's heart skipped a beat. He knew it. Although there was an indescribable feeling in his heart, he still said in a low voice, "But most boys still like girls with long hair." Yi Huan looked at him blankly, as if she didn't understand. Her big eyes were adorable and clear. Shinting couldn't stand it, so he reached out and touched her eyes. He said in a low voice, "So silly." "I'm not stupid." Yi Huan snorted. "The baby is very smart." Shinting smiled again. It was a very gentle smile. At this moment, his eyes were so gentle that they seemed to contain the entire galaxy. However, she was still too young and did not understand. She was still at the age where everything Big Brother Xiangnan said was the right thing to do. Shinting cared, but he could only endure it. He could only let go of his concerns and wait. This was the price he had to pay. Qin Emo had told him about Yi Xiangnan and the various possibilities of his future, the best and the worst. But in Shinting's heart, he only accepted the best. If not, he might not want anything. With that thought in mind, he looked at the little girl again and sighed. "Go take a shower and you can sleep. It's 9 o'clock, it's time for the smart baby to sleep." Yi Huan got off the horse and sat on the carpet like him. Shinting didn't say anything, but his heart couldn't help but throb. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Do you want to ask something?" Yi Huan said pitifully, "Why do I always dream of Brother Xiangnan?" "Why do you dream of him?" Shinting asked softly. "Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering." New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone is the fastest to update. Chapter 45-58. Yi Huan said matter-of-factly, "I like Big Brother Xiangnan." Shinting sighed again. "If you like it, then grow your hair long." Yi Huan looked at him adorably. After a long while, she said unwillingly, "But Big Brother Xiangnan said he likes girls like Aunt Chin. Shinting sat next to her and looked at her quietly. After a while, he suddenly smiled. "What about you?" Yi Huan turned her chubby little face to the side, her eyes wide open. She was only a child, after all, so she didn't understand what Shinting wanted to express. Shinting tugged at her short hair and said very softly, "Don't you like pretty dresses? Why do you want to change yourself according to other people's preferences?" Yi Huan was happy, and her big cute eyes were full of exploration. After a while, she opened her pretty little mouth. "Yeah, I obviously like it." Then, her breath seemed to stop as she murmured, "I want to throw all these clothes away." "Why do you want to throw them away?" Shinting said very slowly and gently, "These are all your choices, and it's a waste to throw them away. After wearing them, change into new ones." Yi Huan was still very dry. She tugged at her hair. "It's so short." After all, she was only a few years old. When she came back to her senses and thought about it, she actually burst into tears. Her voice was earth-shattering. Shinting was a little helpless, but there was a hint of sweetness in this helplessness. He muttered the word little wimp, and unfortunately, it was heard by a certain little wimp. Thus, he cried even louder. Shinting suddenly felt a little helpless. He didn't expect a little girl to be like this. So delicate. He had no choice, and his heart really ached for her. So he carried the little one in his arms and comforted her. Big boys usually didn't have much experience in taking care of children. It was useless to coax her, and the little one cried even louder. Chin Mo returned and gently pushed open the door. He saw his little daughter lying on Shinting's shoulder, crying so hard that her little body trembled. It was indescribably pitiful and somewhat hateful. Little Yi Huan really cried sadly. It would take at least half an hour for her to stop crying. Mr. Qin thought about it for a while and finally decided to give this troublesome little girl to Shinting. Anyway, she would be Shinting's wife in the future. If he didn't coax her, who would? Thinking of this, the heartache and guilt in Qin Mo's heart lessened. Without batting an eyelid, he left. Shinting was coaxing the little fellow when he inadvertently raised his eyes and saw Qin Mo. He narrowed his eyes and smiled helplessly after a while. He looked at the water doll in his arms with slight disdain. Even your father doesn't like you anymore. Water doll, who was crying in the storm, suddenly raised its eyes and stared at Shinting. After that, she burst into tears. Papa doesn't dislike me. Shinting smiled. An indescribable joy rose in his heart, but he felt a little annoyed to see her crying. In the end, he still kissed her little face. All right, don't cry. Big brother has kissed you. Little Yi Huan covered her little face and looked at him pitifully. After a while, she cried again. Big brother kissed me indiscriminately. Teacher said that girls can't be kissed by boys indiscriminately. Shinting's heart was soft. He reached out and hugged her again. After coaxing that little thing for a long time, he finally coaxed her. Like new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Play bar updates the fastest. Chapter 45-59. When she woke up early in the morning, Qin Mo was no longer in the bedroom. Yi Huan looked around but didn't see him. She pursed her lips and sat up. After thinking for a moment, she put on a coat and went to Yi Huan's room. After all, she hadn't been there last night when she had cried so hard. Well, it wasn't that she didn't want to go, but that Qin Mo wouldn't let her. Yi Huan thought irresponsibly and walked to the door of the children's room. It was 8:00 in the morning. Usually, Yi Huan would be up, but today, Yi Huan had a feeling that she was still in the bedroom. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Shinting sitting by the bed, looking at Yi Huan warmly. Yi Huan hadn't woken up yet, which showed how late she had slept last night. Yi Huan walked over quietly and said in a low voice, "Have you had breakfast?" Shinting only snapped out of his daze when she got closer. He immediately stood up and respectfully greeted her as auntie. Then, he said that he had already had breakfast. Yi Huan's gaze first fell on Yi Huan's sleeping face for a while, and then she saw the original document on the bedside table. She knew that Shinting was a very self-disciplined boy. Amidst this self-discipline, he diverted a portion of his attention to Yi Huan. Yi Huan looked at Shinting and thought of the time when she and Qin Mo were young. Did he also take time out from his busy studies to take care of her like Shinting? Suddenly, Yi Huan felt that Qin Mo hadn't had it easy. She seemed to have let him down for many years. She was lost in her thoughts. Shinting called her auntie twice before she came back to her senses. What's wrong? Shinting said seriously, Yi Huan is going to change back into a dress. Do you have any of her old clothes here? Although he said that he wouldn't buy them, the little girl had been dreaming of dresses at night. What could he do? Yi-Hwan was stunned for a moment and then she couldn't believe it. But she quickly remembered. I still have some in my apartment. How about you go and get them with me? Your uncle can take care of Yi-Hwan at home. There was a deeper meaning behind her arrangement. Shin-Ting would be living here in the future. Not only would he be spending time with a little kid like Yi-Hwan, but he would also have to face her and Chin-Mo. Yi-Hwan was probably the most distant person in the family now. Therefore, she felt that she needed some time alone with him. Shin-Ting was also a little surprised, but he quickly understood. Okay, Auntie. Yi-Hwan nodded and returned to her bedroom. She changed her clothes and went downstairs for breakfast before telling Chin-Mo about it. Chin-Mo thought about it for a moment and agreed. While tearing the bread, he asked calmly, do you want a chauffeur or do you want to drive? Yi-Hwan had planned to ask her driver to drive her home, but she didn't expect Chin-Mo to say that. Therefore, she immediately said that she would drive herself. Chin-Mo then told Shin-Ting to take good care of his aunt. Shin-Ting wasn't surprised, because he was a man, and it was natural for him to take care of a girl. On the contrary, Yi-Hwan couldn't take it anymore. Chin-Mo, don't be like this. She's not your little nanny. I'll look down on you if you do this. Chin-Mo and Shin-Ting looked at each other. They actually had a tacit understanding between men. They even dared to look at each other and smile. Yi-Hwan couldn't take it anymore. She glared at him and then said calmly to Shin-Ting, don't be influenced by your uncle. Chin-Mo immediately chuckled. Don't listen to her. Your auntie likes me the most. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. It was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-61. Yi-Hwan couldn't take it anymore. She glared at Chin-Mo and took Shin-Ting away. Before leaving, Yi-Hwan said casually, Shin-Ting, you seem to be smiling. Shin-Ting wanted to deny it, but Chin-Mo nodded. That's right. He's smiling. Shin-Ting looked at them and realized that he couldn't afford to offend any of them. Chin-Mo chuckled again and patted Shin-Ting's shoulder. Don't be afraid of your auntie. She still listens to me. Yi-Hwan couldn't help but roll her eyes. Don't listen to his nonsense. Shin-Ting just smiled. Other than that, what else could he do? Yi-Hwan took the car keys and walked out. Shin-Ting and Chin-Mo greeted each other and followed her. He was very easygoing and natural. Yi-Hwan got into the car and said to Shin-Ting while fastening her seatbelt, fasten your seatbelt. Even the back seat has to be fastened. Shin-Ting nodded and fastened his seatbelt. Yi-Hwan started the car and slowly drove out of the villa. About an hour later, they arrived at her old apartment. She brought Shin-Ting upstairs. She pushed the door open. Because they hadn't lived there for a long time, the housekeeper who cleaned the apartment regularly had quit, so there was a thin layer of dust in the apartment. Yi-Hwan went in and looked at Shin-Ting. Watch TV for a while. I'll go tidy up Yi-Hwan's clothes. Shin-Ting looked around and said briskly, let me do the cleaning, auntie. Yi-Hwan initially refused. She didn't want Shin-Ting to do these things. But when she saw how natural Shin-Ting was and didn't feel uneasy or ingratiating at all, she felt relieved. Actually, Shin-Ting was very relaxed and took the initiative to participate in this family. Chin-Mo and Yi-Hwan were also very natural. She was the one who didn't feel natural. Yi-Hwan smiled faintly and said, that's fine too. Shin-Ting went to get the cleaning tools. Yi-Hwan saw that he was really capable and went to tidy up Yi-Hwan's things with peace of mind. After tidying up, there were indeed quite a lot of things. There were 2 big boxes. Fortunately, he had a pulling pole, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to carry them all. Shinting finished cleaning and came over to help He-Huan with her luggage, but He-Huan refused. Although Shinting was 170 pounds, he was still a kid, and he was very strong. He-Huan didn't say anything else. She followed him into the elevator and went downstairs to put the luggage in the trunk. Shinting had taken care of everything from beginning to end. He-Huan was very satisfied. He would have a little follower in the future. After getting into the car, before He-Huan started the engine, she said softly, "Get a driver's license when you're 18. Shinting immediately knew that He-Huan was in need of a driver. He nodded and He-Huan started the car. When he returned to the villa, the people from the home furnishing company came over to deliver some of the things they had bought yesterday, including a set of bookcases and some decorations for Shinting's room. Little Yi-Huan was sitting there reading, her big eyes blinking as she held a thick book in her arms. Shinting went over and carried her down from the bookcase. "It's dangerous up there." Yi-Huan hugged the thick book and sat on the dark-colored bed to read. She looked like a little doll, and it was a beautiful male version. Shinting smiled gently and turned to tidy up his things. He was a boy who knew how to tidy up and was very clean. He was the complete opposite of Yi-Huan. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-62. Yi-Huan liked to spray things everywhere, which gave Yi-Huan a headache. She had thought that it would be no problem for a child like Shinting to take care of Yi-Huan, but she had never thought that it was because of Shinting that Yi-Huan was so spoiled that she seemed to have no hands. The idiot in life was Qin Yi-Huan herself. After Shinting was done, he looked at the little girl and tugged at her hair. "I don't want to try on your clothes, so I brought them back." Yi-Huan's big head popped out of the book and looked at Shinting eagerly. After a long time, she moved her little body and said, "I want brother Shinting to go with me." Shinting's heart warmed. He gently ran his fingers through her hair and murmured, "Finally, I got it right for once." She used to call him brother, and she couldn't change it no matter what. Little Yi-Huan heard his murmur and raised her little head. "Brother, what are you talking about?" Shinting, after a long time, he exhaled and said, "Nothing." "You're stupid." "How am I stupid? I'm obviously a smart baby." The little girl muttered discontentedly, "Brother is stupid." Shinting looked at her for a long time and suddenly said in a low voice, "Yes, I'm stupid." He had fallen in love with the little fool, so he had become even more stupid. However, little Yi-Huan didn't care about his little feelings. She was now wholeheartedly trying on her new clothes, no, the little skirt from before. Yi-Huan skipped away, and Shinting followed behind. He had a smile on his face, but also a little disappointed. The beginning was beautiful, but the process was unsatisfactory and the result was cruel. After a period of time, the little skirt that Yi-Huan used to wear was actually too small for her to wear. Even if she managed to put it on, it was still very tight. Little Yi-Huan stared at Shinting in the mirror and said, "Brother, you're lying. It doesn't look good at all." Shinting smiled and said, "It's too small." Little Yi-Huan scratched her short hair in annoyance. "Then what should we do?" Shinting was a very pragmatic boy. After thinking for a while, he quickly replied, "I'll buy those clothes when they don't look good anymore." As soon as he finished speaking, Yi-Huan looked at him with an incredulous expression. Shinting smiled. "What's wrong?" Yi-Huan said angrily, "Brother, you said you would buy me a new dress." "You're lying." He couldn't help but laugh. "I also said not to waste it, didn't I? He squatted down and talked to the little man. Up close, his heart was beating very fast. This little person was really too beautiful, especially the black and bright eyes, so pure and unguarded that they collided into his eyes. Shanting's fingers couldn't help but touch her eyelids again as he said in a low voice, "You can buy one as a New Year's gift, okay?" Even if it was just one, Qin Yi Huan would be very happy. It didn't matter what she wore. What was important was that she urgently needed to prove that her beauty was still there. Because Shanting had promised Yi Huan, he mentioned it to Qin Emo and Yi Huan during lunchtime. Qin Emo and Yi Huan were a little surprised by this. However, Shanting's behavior was doting and appropriate, so Qin Emo didn't have much to say. Moreover, Shanting was a big kid, and he wanted the two of them to spend more time together. Therefore, he decided to drive them there himself and wait in the parking lot. Later, when he told Yi Huan about it upstairs, Yi Huan smiled, hugged his neck, and kissed him. "Papa Qin, don't you think you've gone too easy on her? It's unfair to Yi Xiannan. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. My phone is the fastest to update." Chapter 45-63. Later, when he told Yi Huan about it upstairs, Yi Huan smiled, hugged his neck, and kissed him. "Daddy Qin, don't you think you've gone too easy on her? That's unfair to Yi Xiannan." Qin Mo enjoyed it. He snatched a few more kisses and said, "To a man, women are mostly accessories. The love of the men in the Yi family is very strange, so little Mrs. Qin, I don't dare to take risks. What do you think? After all, we only have one precious daughter. It's more reliable to raise a loyal husband, don't you think so?" Yi Huan knew that he was right. This arrangement was definitely good for Yi Huan. But what about Shanting? Shanting had entered their family, so she naturally treated Shanting as her own child. If there was such a day when Shanting was disappointed, she believed that she would be equally sad. Qin Mo understood what she was thinking. He sighed slightly. But for the future of the company, Shanting has to exist. I can't take the risk. A person who was persistent with Yi Huan was the key to inheriting King Entertainment. When Shanting saw the look in Yi Huan's eyes, he knew that Shanting was the person he was looking for. Because he was all too familiar with that look. Yi Muyun, him, Qin Mo, Lan Yu, and Zhou Chongguang all had the same fervent look in their eyes. And this fervent look could support all the inhuman tests and bear the unknown outcome. It was cruel, but it was also fate's arrangement. Shanting knew it from the beginning and accepted it gladly. Why not? If he didn't try, he would never get it. He might as well take a gamble. This was a game and a gamble between the rich and powerful. It was a bet between men. Shanting accepted it. After Qin Mo's explanation, Yi Huan was stunned for a long time. Then she pressed her face against Qin Mo's shoulder and didn't say anything for a long time. Qin Mo didn't say anything at first, but after a while, he couldn't help but chuckle. What's wrong? Seeing the kids like this, little Mrs. Qin wants to date too. Yi Huan was still hugging him and sticking to him. Her voice was soft and obedient, as if she was trying to please him. She said in a low voice, "Qin Mo, aren't we dating every day?" Qin Mo was a little surprised. He was also a little surprised as he looked down at her. Yi Huan, on the other hand, was a little embarrassed. She buried her face and turned to the other side, looking very embarrassed. Qin Mo laughed. "Didn't you confess boldly just now? Why are you like this now? Like a turtle hiding its head in its shell." Yi Huan buried her little face in the other side. Wherever he went, she would run to the other side. As she ran, he caught up with her and kissed her. Just as they were playing sweetly, Shinting came over with Yi Huan. It was Yi Huan who wanted to set off. However, her father and mother, who were making out, forgot to close the door, so the little baby opened her eyes wide and looked at them eagerly. Shinting was actually shocked. He didn't expect such a scene. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately covered little Yi Huan's eyes to prevent her from looking. However, little Yi Huan still peeked through his fingers. Shinting had no choice but to immediately pick up the little girl and bring her to his bedroom, ready to educate her. However, before he could educate her, Qin Yi Huan looked at him with a very old face and said very slowly, "Papa, Mommy kissed you." "Brother, why is your face so red?" "Like new wife number 1, husband, I'm addicted to spoiling." New wife number 1, husband, I'm addicted to spoiling. Play bar was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-64. After Yi Huan asked, Shinting's face turned even redder. He tugged at the little fellow's short hair. "I'm a little hot." Qin Yi Huan covered her little face, looking surprised. "You can feel hot in this kind of weather." "Brother, you're different from others." "What's different?" Shinting was curious. Yi Huan mumbled, "You don't mean what you say." "That's why I'm different." Shinting's eyes widened. He couldn't believe that he had been fooled by a little kid. Moreover, it was a kid that he liked. He stared at the little fellow's little face, his voice getting hoarser. "What do you mean by saying one thing but meaning what you say?" Little Yi Huan didn't say anything. She just climbed onto his knees and reached out to touch his face before saying, "It's a little hot." Seeing her like this, Shinting abruptly grabbed her little hand, his expression also very uncomfortable. And a little scary. At least little Yi Huan was a little scared. She looked at him and said in a low voice, "Brother, what's wrong?" Shinting's expression was still very unnatural. But he still cared about the child's feelings. He reached out to cover her eyes and said in a low voice, "Nothing, I just thought of something." When she couldn't see him, he let out a long breath. His breath brushed against little Yi Huan's little face. It was warm and the baby felt so comfortable. She giggled. Shinting exhaled again. What a little fool. He didn't do anything else but cover her eyes. After a while, Yi Huan said strangely, "Brother, you must have not done well in your exams. You're going to get a double score." Shinting didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Where did this child's brain come from? He put down his hand and looked at her. "I get first place in the whole of B City every time." In fact, he could go to America to study, but he had to stay with her in B City for 3 years. It wasn't Qin Mo's request, it was his. These 3 years hadn't been easy for him either. Other than his own homework, he had to learn about finance. Uncle Qin didn't just have to manage King Entertainment. In fact, the Qin family's business had long been involved in many aspects. The entertainment industry was just the tip of the iceberg. Shinting was under a lot of pressure. However, with this little cutie, the days should not be lonely anymore. Little Yi Huan grabbed his hand, her eyes still blinking. After a while, she said, "Brother, Mom and Dad should be done kissing, right?" When she said that, Shinting's face actually felt a little hot again. He gently turned his face away. "I'll go downstairs first. You go take a look. If it's okay, come find me first." Yi Huan let out a long "oh" before looking at Shinting suspiciously. "Brother, are you shy?" "Nope." Shinting replied quickly, looking a little flustered. On the other hand, Yi Huan dragged her voice, "But why do I feel like you're blushing? You seem embarrassed." "Actually, Brother Shinting, you don't have to be embarrassed. There are many shows like this on TV, and Shinting was a little incredulous. You see this? Yi Huan looked at him as if he was an idiot. It's all on TV. Brother, you haven't seen it before. I haven't seen it before, he said bluntly. His parents were also very conservative. They were busy with scheming and grooming him. They didn't have time for such romance. He had only seen it live once, and that was with Qin Emo and He Huan. So, this was how kissing was. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-65. After Shinting said that, Yi Huan looked at him eagerly and saw the suspicious blush on his face. Brother, you're blushing again. Little Yi Huan let out a strange cry and climbed onto Shinting's knees. She cupped his face with her little hands and looked at him from left to right curiously. Shinting's face turned even redder. He turned his face away awkwardly and said in a low voice, I'm not. Little Yi Huan smiled evilly. Brother, you are. Your face is red again. Then, as she hopped down, she turned her head and made a face at Shinting. Shinting then whispered a few words, however, Qin Yi Huan couldn't hear him anymore and ran away. Shinting let out a long sigh and got up to go downstairs to wait. He sat on the sofa and flipped through a magazine to kill time and hide the throbbing in his heart. She was too young. It would be a long process for her to grow up. And it would be a painful and sweet process. Qin Emo and He Huan went downstairs. Yi Huan was in front. She jumped over and called him brother. Shinting looked up. Are you done? He was really a good-looking and elegant boy. When he stood up, even He Huan couldn't help but be blinded. Shinting's appearance was no worse than Qin Mo's when he was young. In fact, he looked more gentle. Qin Emo saw that He Huan was distracted. President Qin's heart was filled with jealousy. He stared at He Huan for a long time before he snorted. Mrs. Qin, let me remind you that Shinting is only 13. He Huan actually knew, but she pretended not to know. She glanced at Qin Emo and smiled. That doesn't stop me from admiring you. Qin Emo pinched her cheek. Mrs. Qin, I'm not enough for you to look at. Do you need to look at someone else? Qin Emo, you're getting old. He Huan's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. Mr. Qin was about to explode. He gritted his teeth. He Huan, what did you say? I'm old. He Huan said fearlessly, yes, you're old. Qin Emo wanted to strangle her. He narrowed his eyes. Mrs. Qin, I'm not 40 yet. He Huan smiled and said, yeah, he's not even 40 yet, so he's only 25 years older than Shinting. No, it's New Year. I'm 26. He was already at the bottom of the stairs. He Huan reached out and grabbed his collar. You'll be 40 next year, Mr. Qin. Miss He, you're already 33. You're past the age of being spoiled. From now on, you're not. Qin Emo held her hand and snorted. Fine, I won't, He Huan mumbled. You'll beg me. Qin Emo was amused and annoyed at the same time. He pulled her hair and said in a low voice, You're so sure that I'm yours, aren't you? He Huan's face was full of pride. Yes, I'm yours. Qin Emo smiled. It was a meaningful smile. He Huan glared at him and said in a low voice, You're shameless. How am I shameless? You're the one who said it. Qin Emo smiled happily. He Huan ignored him. She walked over and pulled Yi Huan and Shinting into the car. Qin Emo, on the other hand, walked slowly behind them. He lit a cigarette and finished it outside the car. Huan wasn't a patient person. She waited for about 2 minutes and rolled down the window. She looked at Qin Emo and said, "How long are you going to smoke?" New wife number 1, honey, I'm addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, honey, I'm addicted to spoiling. My phone was updated the fastest. Chapter 45-66. Huan wasn't a patient person. After waiting for about 2 minutes, she couldn't help but wind down the window and look at Qin Emo. "How much longer are you going to smoke?" Qin Emo smiled, took a few deep puffs, and then put out the cigarette before getting into the car. Qin Emo fastened his seatbelt, turned on the GPS, and said casually, "Let's eat out tonight." No one had any objections, so Qin Emo started the car. The car drove slowly on the streets of B City. On the way, Qin Emo received a call from Secretary He, saying that the schedule for 214 had been arranged, but there were only 17% of the screenings. Secretary He said worriedly, "President Qin, there might be some trouble in the future with such a schedule. After all, it's a commercial film, and artistic films aren't popular. Do you want to do something about it?" Qin Emo held the steering wheel with one hand and asked casually, "What about the screenings after the screening? Have they been locked in?" This was the usual method to prevent the theater from making adjustments. Even if they bought 2 tickets online, the movie would still have to be shown. AIG's company was using this method, which was why Twin couldn't get any resources. After Qin Emo finished speaking, Secretary He said, "From the 15th to the 20th, there were a lot of screenings that were locked in. I don't think there's enough momentum, but there's nothing they can do about it." "Got it." Qin Emo said simply and hung up. Huan knew what they were talking about. She wanted to ask, but she swallowed her words. Qin Emo naturally knew what she wanted to ask, so he patted her hand to comfort her. "I'll solve it." Huan nodded and turned to look at him, then thought for a moment. "Qin Emo, it's fine as long as you tried your best. Everything else isn't important. I don't care about fame and fortune, but AI Meng Meng. I really think it's not easy for her to be like this and wrong you." Qin Mo's voice had a hint of a smile. "I know." Then, he said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Don't worry, everything will be solved." He freed a hand and pinched her soft and tender face. His voice suddenly became hoarse. "Even if I have to get 1 billion. Huan's eyes widened and he shrieked, "Qin Emo, are you crazy? Why don't you keep the 1 billion for me to spend?" Qin Emo chuckled. "This move will bring about a rise in the stock market. We'll be able to earn back what we lost. Oh right, I forgot to tell you that King Entertainment is the main producer of this film. Even if it's for my sake, don't you think we should make it look better?" Huan was speechless. "Qin Emo, you don't have to do this. It's a project that doesn't make money." Qin Emo smiled. "We'll know later whether we can earn it or not. But isn't it the same for you or me?" Huan understood that it was different. She muttered in a low voice, and then did not say anything more. Actually, Qin Emo understood what she wanted to say. The car stopped in the parking lot of a plaza. Qin Emo unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to Shinting in the back seat. "Bring the phone and bring Huan. I'll give you 1.5 hours. Your auntie and I will be at the Starbucks on the 1st floor." Shinting nodded, opened the car door and got out, even carrying the little one. Huan was very happy because she could go shopping alone with her brother. But she did not expect to meet brother Xiangnan. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My mobile phone updates are the fastest. Chapter 45-67. At the entrance of a children's clothing store, Yi Xiangnan and Bai Anan were both there. When Yuan brought them there, Bai Anan picked out the clothes and was about to leave when she saw Shinting and Qin Yihuan coming over. They were caught off guard. Shinting didn't expect to meet Yi Xiangnan so early. That boy was born into a good family and was 1 year younger than him. He was about the same height and was also very good-looking. However, probably because of his body, his skin was very white, so he looked especially gentle and noble. Shinting looked at him quietly. Suddenly, his hand loosened, and the baby he was holding jumped over. Brother Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan was originally standing, but he also looked at Shinting with a slightly deep gaze. He was also aware of the arrangements made by his family. He also liked Yi Huan very much. She was beautiful and had a cute personality. If nothing went wrong, he was indeed going to marry Yi Huan. However, there seemed to be a little accident now. He also knew that Shinting had appeared. In the Yi family, Yi Mubai would tell him everything that was related to him, including Yi Huan's matters and Qin Mo's arrangements. He could accept it. Because Qin Mo didn't have a son, and the Qin family obviously didn't want Qin Yi Huan to live too hard. In fact, Shinting's arrangements were actually the biggest pressure on Shinting, not Yi Xiangnan. As long as he grew up and didn't like Yi Huan so much. Yi Xiangnan thought in his heart. Then, a small and soft and fat person jumped into his arms. He was stuffed full. He lowered his head and said in a slightly low voice, Yi Huan. Qin Yi Huan hugged him and kissed him like a kitten. Brother Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan lowered his head and reached out to touch her little head. Why are you here? Where are Uncle Qin and Auntie Qin? Yi Huan was only 7 years old. She was at the age where she was naive and ignorant, so how could she know what Yi Xiannan was scheming? Thus, she enthusiastically and straightforwardly introduced, Brother Xiannan, this is Brother Shinting. She even pulled Yi Xiangnan over. When Yuan and Bai Anan watched from the side without doing anything. Bai Anan even asked when Yuan in a low voice, Auntie, is Xiangnan jealous? When Yuan was also particularly helpless. She knew that Xiangnan liked Yi Huan. Although she had never said it, she could tell that Xiangnan did not reject the family's arrangements. Shinting was also very outstanding. She had to admit that Qin Mo had a good taste. Besides, the Qin family was not wrong. The children were still young. Who knew what the future would be like? The Qin family was double insurance. If Xiangnan couldn't even accept this, it meant that his psychological endurance was too weak. If he lost to Shinting, it would only mean that Shinting was more suitable for Yi Huan. When Yuan was very open-minded. Then, he whispered to Bai Anan, probably. Bai Anan smiled. Her smile was light and carefree. Her personality was very similar to Yi Mulan. At this moment, when Yuan looked at her and thought that Shueli's genes were not reflected in this child. In the past, she actually looked like Bai Shueli. But now, she looked more and more like Mulan. Actually, there was nothing wrong with looking like Mulan, it was just that her personality was becoming more and more indifferent. She was too calm. When Yuan smiled faintly, then looked at Yi Xiannan again. She knew that her son was a little frustrated because he didn't get complete approval. Boys at this age were young and energetic. They wouldn't think too much. Shinting was about the same age as Xiangnan, but he was especially calm. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. The updates were the fastest. Chapter 45-68. At this moment, Yi Xiangnan and Shinting were looking at each other silently. Little Yi Huan opened her big eyes wide and said, "Big brother, this is Big brother Xiangnan." Yi Xiangnan lowered his head and asked, "How many big brothers do you have?" Little Yi Huan blinked and looked at him, unable to say a word. Bai Ainin said to Wen Yuan in a low voice, "Yi Xiangnan is playing the lute to a cow." Wen Yuan thought so too. How old was Yi Huan? Although she always chased after him and said that she liked big brother Xiangnan, feelings were easy to change. Moreover, how old was Yi Huan? How could she understand these things? His son got serious and lost the moment he got serious. On the other hand, Shinting was still very calm. His aura was definitely not inferior to his son. When Yuan sighed in admiration. Xiangnan was probably going to suffer in love in the future. At this moment, after Yi Xiangnan asked, Yi Huan opened her eyes wide and looked puzzled. Then she said softly, "They're both big brothers." She thought for a while and said, "Big brother Xiangnan and big brother Shinting are different." After all, Yi Xiangnan was used to being arrogant. He smiled faintly and said, "Then which big brother do you like?" Little Yi Huan was in a dilemma. She looked at Shinting and big brother Xiangnan for a long time. She vaguely felt that the other one would be angry if she said either one. How difficult. The little fellow sighed secretly. Being too popular was also a kind of trouble. Then she cheered up and said with a smile, "They're both important." This answer was a pleasant surprise to Shinting, but it was a big blow to Yi Xiangnan. It had only been 2 days, and Shinting's status was already the same as his. He looked at little Yi Huan for a while and then said softly, "You're not going to change it." Yi Huan's heart was once again conflicted, but in the end, she still said honestly, "Brother Xiangnan, brother Shinting is also very good." She couldn't hurt brother Shinting's heart for Xiangnan's sake. This was what Yi Huan thought. Yi Xiangnan looked at her quietly for a long time. Finally, he reached out and gently stroked her hair. "Got it." Then he let go of her and turned to look at Wen Yuan and Bai Ainin. "Let's go." Wen Yuan knew that his son was angry, so he smiled and said, "Why don't we have a meal with your Uncle Qin and the others?" Yi Xiangnan revealed a strange smile. "I won't bother you anymore." Bai Ainin couldn't help but roll her eyes. Stubborn Yi Xiangnan. Jealous Yi Xiangnan. However, Yi Xiannan was already walking forward, looking rather proud. Wen Yuan had no choice but to appease Yi Huan. The little guy looked at Yi Xiannan eagerly, then asked Wen Yuan, "Is big brother Xiannan angry?" Wen Yuan smiled helplessly. "Don't worry about him. It's just a young master's temper." Yi Huan let out an "oh," then hung her head dejectedly. "I still want to let Xiangnan gauge see if I look good in a little skirt." At this moment, Yi Xiangnan turned his head and looked at Shinting's face. Then he smiled faintly and said, "It's better for you to wear pants." This was a provocation to Shinting. The two boys, who were only in their teens, were already arguing over a little girl. However, it was Yi Xiangnan's one-sided argument. Shinting didn't say anything. He just reached out and gently rubbed Yi Huan's little head as a silent comfort. Yi Huan raised her little face and looked pitiful. There was a hint of moisture in her big eyes. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. It was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-69. Shinting couldn't bear to see her like this. He didn't know what he was thinking, but he lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead. Yi Huan raised her head and looked straight into Shinting's eyes. After a while, she turned to look at Yi Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan had both hands in his pockets and looked at them quietly. There was no emotion in his eyes. Yi Huan's lips moved, but she didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan turned and left. Wen Yuan had no choice but to follow him. Bai Anan walked over and reached out to stroke Yi Huan's head. She said softly, "Ignore that idiot." Shinting's gaze fell on Bai Anan. Bai Anan was about 12 or 13 years old and was already 165 centimeters tall. She was very tall and she looked extremely calm. In just a few seconds, Shinting could tell that this was a girl who was very similar to him. They were too similar. The difference was that Bai Anan probably had too much, so she didn't have any desires. And in Shinting's heart, there was already a Yi Huan. While Shinting was looking at Bai Anan was also sizing him up. With just a few looks, she could tell that he was a ruthless character. In the future, there would be Yi Xiangnan crying. In the end, Bai Anan still left. As soon as she left, Yi Huan burst into tears. She cried so miserably. Big brother Xiangnan was angry at her. He was giving her a cold shoulder and ignoring her. The chubby baby cried especially miserably. She didn't care whether this was a shopping mall or not. Heartbroken, she just wanted to cry. Shinting was in a difficult position. He bent down to coax her, but the baby didn't care at all. She was sad and wanted to cry. Her cries were so loud that Yi Xiangnan, who had walked far away, could hear it. However, he only frowned and continued walking. Bai Anan was beside him. "Hey, the little one is crying. Are you really going to ignore her?" Yi Xiangnan's footsteps paused. He kicked his feet on the spot and said very slowly, "If she wants to cry, what can I do?" Bai Anan coughed lightly. She cried because Big Brother Xiangnan ignored her. In Yi Huan's heart, Big Brother Xiangnan is more important. As soon as she finished speaking, Yi Xiangnan's face flushed. He glared at Bai Anan fiercely, then slowly walked back to where he came from. While Yi Huan was still crying, Shinting had already picked her up and wiped her nose. That crying face of hers didn't have the slightest bit of Qin Chen's elegance. Yi Xiangnan stared at her being carried by Shinting. His footsteps became slower and slower. For a moment, he wanted to leave, but Yi Huan saw him. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. He cursed in his heart. He didn't say anything. He took out a lollipop from his pocket and stuffed it into her hand. Then, he scolded her for being an idiot. Yi Huan was in a daze. While she was in a daze, Yi Xiangnan had already turned around and left. It was very cool. Yi Huan stopped crying, but she still sniffled. She looked very pitiful. After a long time, she asked Shinting softly, "Will Big Brother Xiangnan not want me anymore?" Shinting's heart ached, but he smiled. "He won't." Yi Huan was very depressed. "He said that I don't look good in a dress." "What does Yi Huan think?" Shinting asked her gently as he wiped the cat's face. Yi Huan was stunned for a while before she said proudly, "Of course I look good. If the baby didn't look good, who looked good?" Shinting smiled again. "That's it. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update." Chapter 45-70. Shinting looked very handsome when he smiled. Yi Huan stared at him in a daze. After a long time, she swallowed her saliva and said, "Brother, you're so handsome." Shinting was speechless. After a while, he whispered, "Are you still going to buy a dress?" With Yi Huan's limited EQ, she thought for a long time and finally decided to buy a dress to please brother Enchanting. At most, she would just buy it and not wear it. Thus, she nodded her head vigorously, tears still hanging on her little face. Enchanting helped her wipe them off and then carried her to try on the dress. Huan was unhappy, so she pointed at a random dress and wanted this one. She didn't want to try it on. Enchanting was very meticulous. He quickly understood and didn't say anything. He just swiped his card and took the bag downstairs. When they reached the Starbucks on the first floor, they found Emo and Huan. Emo immediately saw Huan's crying face and smiled. "Did you cry?" Enchanting hesitated for a moment. Huan had already jumped into her father's arms with a lollipop in her hand. "Brother Xiangnan is angry and doesn't want to talk to me anymore." Emo was annoyed and amused at the same time. He looked at his little girl and murmured after a long time, "Our little girl broke up." "No way," Huan said as she took a deep breath and buried herself in her father's arms. Although her parents and brother Enchanting were here, she still couldn't help thinking about brother Xiangnan. Although brother Enchanting was also handsome, it was different. The little Huan already had different thoughts. Emo comforted her for a long time and had a children's meal with the whole family. Only then did the little girl's mood improve. Throughout the night, Huan stuck to Emo, including when they got off the car. Emo also loved her. He carried her off the car and upstairs. Enchanting sat in the back seat and didn't get off for a long time. After a few steps, Huan turned back and asked Enchanting, "Why don't you go back?" Enchanting snapped out of his trance and chuckled softly before getting out of the car. However, his hand lightly held a paper bag, holding it for a while before letting go. Huan looked on silently. She actually understood his feelings, but she didn't say anything. She chose to pretend that she didn't know about Enchanting's disappointment. This was just a small matter. There would be many such things happening in the future. Enchanting didn't need to be comforted by such things. Instead, it would hurt his self-esteem. Huan thought, "I can handle this child by myself." However, she still walked side by side with Enchanting and patted his shoulder. "Sleep early. We'll take care of Huan tonight. She might sleep in our room." Enchanting nodded. Huan added, "Don't stay up too late to read." "Thank you, Auntie," Enchanting suddenly said, quite seriously. Huan smiled. "What are you thanking me for?" "We're family." She paused, then said, "No matter what." Enchanting smiled. They went to the second floor together. After saying goodnight to Huan, he went to his room. When he got back, he didn't rush to read. Instead, he put down the paper bag in his hand and took out a little dress. It was Huan's dress. She was so sad that she completely forgot about it. She didn't pay attention when she picked it and then forgot about it. Perhaps it was because of his position in her heart. Was the order really that important? He didn't know if he would lose, but he didn't want to give up. He might not be able to meet such a despicable person in the future. Even if his head was bleeding, he didn't want to give up. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-71. While Enchanting was feeling dejected, Emo carefully placed the crying Huan on the big bed. He then carefully removed the little girl's coat and shoes and gently covered her with the blanket. As a father, his heart always softened when he saw his daughter sleeping soundly. He sat by the bed and looked at her for a long while. When Huan came in, she saw him like this. She lowered her voice and said, "Emo, Qin Emo looked up at He Huan and smiled. What's wrong? You look like you're in deep trouble. He Huan closed the door and leaned against it for a while. Qin Emo didn't say anything and just looked at her. After a long while, He Huan finally walked over and leaned behind him. She rested her head on Qin Mo's shoulder and asked softly, "Is it too cruel to Shinting? That child is so good. Even if he's not in the Qin family, I believe he'll have a bright future." Qin He tilted his head and stared at her for a long while before his gaze returned to Yi Huan. He didn't say anything for a long while. He Huan couldn't wait any longer and urged, "Qin Emo." Qin Emo held her hand and said slowly, "Yes, if he doesn't enter the Qin family or King Entertainment, Shinting can do it himself. He can start his own company when he's 40. Maybe it'll be worth billions or even billions. But to reach the level of King Entertainment, it'll take at least 2 generations." He Huan couldn't stand his argument and said in a low voice, "Qin Emo, it's not like that. You can't think of everything from a realistic perspective. Shinting doesn't think that way." Qin Emo laughed softly. "You like this kid a lot. You're speaking up for him so quickly." He Huan was rendered speechless for a moment. Qin Emo chuckled again. "You don't look convinced. Then let's go with your line of thinking. If Shinting isn't here for this, then he's here for Yi Huan. Do you agree?" He Huan remained silent. Qin Emo smiled. "If you don't object, I'll continue. Since it's for love, it's not a big deal to suffer a little, right? No one forced him. Everything is his own choice. If you don't give him this chance now, maybe he won't be willing." Qin Emo smiled. After he finished speaking, He Huan covered her face and said, "Qin Emo, why does everything you say sound so reasonable? In fact, we all know how cruel the truth is." Qin Emo looked at her. "Are you in pain now? Unhappy?" He Huan was speechless again. After a while, he snorted and said, "I'm going to take a shower." Qin Emo laughed and patted her. "You get angry when you can't win. Puppies are like that." He Huan turned around and glared at him. "I'm a puppy. I'll bite you to death when I get back." Qin Emo laughed and said in a low voice, "I'll be waiting for you. I'm just afraid you don't have the guts." He Huan felt that it would be inappropriate to continue talking to him. Hence, she ignored him and went to the bathroom to take a shower. When she came out, Qin Emo was no longer in the bedroom. He Huan crawled over to Yi Huan and laid down beside her. She kissed the little girl and thought that Qin Emo must have gone to comfort Shinting. This child had only just arrived and had already run into Xiangnan. Even if he hadn't been dealt a heavy blow, he must have been feeling rather upset. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-72. He Huan was also an experienced person and had tasted the pain of love. She also knew that the Qin family seemed to be. Shinting was just another Qin Emo or Yimuyun. However, his situation was worse than everyone else's, and there was no way he could compare to Yi Xiangnan. He Huan sighed. It was really difficult for that child. She waited for Qin Emo and deliberately stayed awake. Sure enough, Qin Emo came back within half an hour. The door opened and closed. He Huan asked, "How is he?" "Reading." Qin Emo smiled faintly as he walked over and sat beside He Huan. He Huan looked at him, and Qin Emo chuckled. "I tested him on his homework. It's nothing like the comfort you're talking about." Qin Mo's eyes were glued to Qin Mo's chest. He Huan nodded and looked at him. Qin Mo smiled and did not say anything else. He kissed her and said, "I'm going to take a shower." Yi Huan watched him leave. After a while, she heard Yi Huan talking in her sleep, calling Xiangnan brother. Yi Huan smiled. She felt helpless and a little sad for Shinting. However, just like what Qin Mo said, Shinting could only adjust everything himself. No one else could help him. Just like that, everyone spent the night with their own thoughts. Shinting did not give the dress to Yi Huan, and Yi Huan did not mention it either. Perhaps she had forgotten about it. Shinting hung up the dress in his wardrobe for many years. However, Yi Huan did not know about it. Early in the morning, Shinting went to the changing room after washing up. He could not help but glance at the dress again. After looking at it, he was silent for a long time before he took out a set of clothes to change into. When he went downstairs, he was surprised to see only Qin Mo and Yi Huan sitting at the dining table. Yi Huan was not there. "Good morning, uncle and auntie." Shinting sat at the dining table. "Is Yi Huan awake yet?" Qin Mo told the truth. The car of the Yi family came to pick her up early in the morning and said that she would play for 2 days. When Qin Mo said this, he also felt that it was unfair to Shinting. However, this deal was unfair from the beginning. Moreover, Shinting wouldn't give up just because of this small matter. If he gave up, he wouldn't be Shinting, and that wouldn't be love. Although Qin Mo felt a little apologetic, he still told the truth. Yi Huan, who was standing at the side, also felt uncomfortable. She secretly kicked Qin Mo under the table. Qin Mo turned his head and looked at Yi Huan. "Why did you kick me?" Yi Huan gritted his teeth and said, "I didn't kick you." "In that case, it must be a puppy," Qin Mo concluded, which infuriated Yi Huan. She glared at him and said, "Qin Mo." Qin Mo smiled and didn't care if his little wife would be angry. He just said to Shinting in a low voice, "I'm going to the company today. I remember that you have a few more days before school starts, right?" Shinting nodded. Qin Mo quickly said, "Come with me to the company later." Shinting nodded again. Yi Huan asked softly, "How's the premiere?" Qin Mo drank half a glass of milk and said honestly, "It's not good. There are too few showtimes. If we want to counterattack, we can only rely on word of mouth. But we have to solve the problem of being locked out first. We'll talk about it at the company later." Yi Huan looked at him, wanting to say something but hesitating. But Qin Mo knew what she was thinking. He said in a low voice, "I know what you mean. A bet for her to be happy was not a bad thing. For King Entertainment, it wouldn't change the foundation. At most, it would make AI Jia jump a few times. Like new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Play bar updates the fastest." Chapter 45-73. No matter how despicable AI Jia was in the business world, he didn't care. But when it came to the Qin family, Yi Huan and his parents, he would never let her get away with it. Even if she used to be someone from the land of Qin. Qin Mo's expression darkened at this thought. Yi Huan turned to him and said in a low voice, "Qin Mo, what's wrong?" Qin Mo shook his head. "Nothing." He put down the cup in his hand. "I'll wait for you in the car." With that, he walked out. Yi Huan looked at his back and said to Shinting, "Don't you think your uncle is a little weird?" Shinting nodded matter-of-factly. "He does look a little different." Yi Huan wanted to make him talk more, so she leaned over and asked, "What do you think is different?" Shinting looked a little speechless. Auntie should know better. Yi Huan thought, "Can't we talk properly? Kids these days are all so bad. Shinting felt very innocent. He couldn't answer this kind of question. In the end, they got into the car together and went to King Entertainment. Qin and Mo had a meeting. He Huan didn't attend, but Shinting did. Because of this, He Huan had a different opinion of Qin and Mo. Because of his own ability, Shinting could only attend such a core meeting at the age of 26. And now, Shinting was only 13. He Huan thought that Qin and Mo was really grooming Shinting as his successor. In her heart, she seemed to be able to understand Qin and Mo. She could understand his pain and difficulties. Perhaps Shinting really had to show up. Otherwise, Yi Huan would be the one working hard in the meeting at the age of 13. Then, Yi Huan felt that she was a little selfish. She couldn't bear to leave Yi Huan, but she felt that Qin and Mo was grooming Shinting. Just as she was letting her imagination run wild, the 2-hour meeting came to an end. Qin and Mo and Shinting walked in as they talked, followed by Secretary He. He Huan was a little surprised because in the past, Qin and Mo would directly delegate matters to Secretary He. It was not like now, where he had to discuss with Shinting. Secretary He was also waiting behind him in a good mood. She saw that He Huan was a little stunned, so she smiled and secretly said, "Shinting is very good. He doesn't look like a 13-year-old at all. President Qin really has sharp eyes. Where did he find such a treasure?" He Huan felt a sense of pride in his heart. He smiled faintly and said, "He's the child of a friend of Qin Mo's." Although she said that, how could Secretary He not understand? Why would a friend's child be brought to King Entertainment and attend such a meeting? She bet a pack of spicy sticks that President Qin was grooming Shinting as his successor. However, knowing was one thing, but Secretary He still did not say anything. There was a saying called praising someone to death. Before everything was settled, it was better not to say anything. It was better for the child. After the two women finished talking, Qin Mo was on the phone. After about 10 minutes, he hung up and said calmly, 214 can't be changed, but from 215 onwards, he looked at Secretary He. Start injecting capital. Make the box office higher than searching for Tang Dynasty. Secretary He was a little worried. Can we do that? What if the volume is a little too big? Qin Mo frowned. If we can't even beat a lousy film, then don't do it. Lousy film. He Huan stuck out her tongue. She really admired Qin Mo. No one had ever said that Ijia was a lousy film. Like New Wife Number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New Wife Number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Hit bar was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-74. However, He Huan had to admit that she was secretly pleased with what Qin Mo had said. But even so, she couldn't say that it was a lousy film. Otherwise, it would be a slap in the face if she couldn't beat it. She had heard that both her and Aijia's films had been nominated for the Oscars next month. Actually, He Huan didn't think much of it. It was just that her opponent was Aijia, so He Huan couldn't help but feel a little more concerned. But she tried her best to remain calm. She still wanted to prove herself with her ability. Moreover, she didn't want to trouble Qin Mo with such things. Qin Mo didn't just manage King Entertainment. She knew that he was very busy. After Qin Mo finished speaking, not only He Huan, but even Secretary He was stunned. Since when had President Qin become so generous? In the past, President Qin had hated things like manipulating votes. It was useless to say that it was a lousy film. But now, in order to curry favor with his wife, he wanted to manipulate votes while saying that the other party's film was lousy. Was he being reasonable? He was being completely unreasonable. Secretary, he endured the pain and smiled. All right, President Qin. We'll definitely make it. This maneuver made He Huan, who was standing at the side, feel ashamed. Was she going to lose for sure? She was thinking about manipulating votes. Qin Emo seemed to have read her mind. He said, if you don't, you'll definitely lose. It would only be for 2 or 3 days. After that, the reputation of the film would turn the tables and beat the other lousy films. This time, AIGA's film was indeed a lousy film. The grand scenes were all a bluff. There was no way it could stabilize later on. But if Twin didn't build momentum, an artistic film would still lose to a lousy film. There was no other way. This was how the market was. As Qin Emo made these arrangements, he took care of some other matters. He Huan and Enchanting chatted casually for a while. But Qin Emo called Enchanting over after a while. He Huan thought that Qin Emo would only be busy at King Entertainment for half a day. She didn't expect that he would bring her and Enchanting to a newly built building in the prime area of B City in the afternoon. A Moore building. It was 68 stories high, and it was an asset under Qin Mo's name. It mainly focused on finance, and there was not only one company, but many companies, managed by various elite teams. Qin Emo only attended a briefing once a week, but it was tiring enough. He Huan was resting in the lounge attached to the office. Occasionally, she could hear Qin Mo's voice and Enchanting's. For the entire afternoon, both Qin Emo and Enchanting were busy. He Huan couldn't help but say, Qin Emo, Enchanting is only 13 years old. Before Enchanting could say anything, Qin Emo said, when I was 13, it was common for me to sleep less than 4 hours a day. He Huan was a little angry. Are you going to let Enchanting sleep for less than 4 hours? Qin Emo calmed down a little and lowered his voice. I didn't say that. Be a good boy, I'll try not to let him work so hard. However, he quickly said meaningfully, He Huan, the price you pay is proportional to the price you get. I don't think Yi Xiannan will have it easy either. You know this as well, so you really have to consider shielding her, don't you? He Huan was really a little unhappy with what he said. She bit her lip and said softly after a long time, you're right. She's angry again. Qin Emo laughed. She gets angry so easily. She's even more childish than Yi Huan. Enchanting, do you want to coax your auntie? Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-75. Finally, the adults were done flirting with each other. Enchanting's face was no longer as hot as before. It wasn't until they got into the car that he calmed down, but he still felt a little uncomfortable. Looking at the people in front of him, Qin Emo was discussing the movie with He Huan as he drove. He was really going to discuss it with He Huan now. After all, He Huan was the one who made the movie, even though he did a lot of post-production work. Qin Emo held the steering wheel and looked at the car in front of him. He said calmly, the negative news about AI Meng Meng has decreased a lot recently. He Huan thought of the best actress, so she asked softly, what about the negative news about her? But AI Meng Meng is different. She needs a strong opportunity. With the success of Twin, she needs a positive image. With a lot of people supporting her and helping her clear her name, the public will be able to accept that her dark history was framed and not something she did on her own accord. Do you understand? Qin Mo's voice was husky and charming. Didn't I say that she would appear at the premiere and announce that she got married a long time ago? She will be able to make a comeback easily, but AI Meng Meng is different. She needs a strong opportunity. Huan understood and was grateful. She didn't have anything to do with AI Meng Meng, but she felt sorry for Rongyu. Rongyu's health wasn't good and he couldn't take a blow. She also had limited abilities. Only Qin Mo could protect AI Meng Meng. However, Huan suddenly felt a little upset. She even forgot about Shinting in the back seat and said in a low voice, "Qin Mo, I'm a little jealous." As she said that, she hugged his arm gently and even put her head on his shoulder. President Qin was shocked by his wife's sudden coquettishness. He glanced at the rearview mirror quietly with a hint of warning in his eyes. Shinting immediately turned his face away. "Don't listen to indecent things, don't look at indecent things, don't speak indecent things." Qin Mo was satisfied. This child was really sensible. He then rubbed Huan's head and said hoarsely, "What's wrong? Why are you suddenly acting coquettishly?" At this moment, Huan was completely immersed in the feelings of a young girl. When she spoke, her voice was like that of a little lamb, soft, cute, and adorable. She said in a low voice, "I'm just angry that you're so nice to her. In the past, you even arranged roles for her and even gave her a house and a car." Finally, the spoiled little woman said angrily, "You're practically treating her like a concubine." Qin Mo was speechless. He thought about it as he drove. Finally, he nodded in agreement. "Yes, yes, yes. You're right." Huan glared at him, looking as if he was about to die of anger. Qin Mo's voice carried a hint of a smile. "Yes, in the end, my concubine married your first love. Isn't that fair? Are you feeling better now, Mrs. Qin?" Huan was speechless. After a long while, she whispered, "My first love is not Rongyu." Qin Mo's heart was sour, sad, and a little sweet. His voice changed to a gentle tone, as if he was talking to his lover. "Then who is it? Can you tell me?" Huan was about to speak when an uncomfortable cough came from the back seat. It was Shinting. He couldn't stand it anymore. These two adults were too shameless. Huan blushed and felt a little hot. She glared at Qin Mo, sat up straight, and ignored him. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. My phone is the fastest to update. Chapter 45-77. Just as Huan was about to speak, an uncomfortable cough came from the back seat. It was Shinting. He couldn't stand it anymore. These two adults were too shameless. Huan blushed and felt a little hot. She glared at Qin Mo and sat up straight, ignoring him. Qin Mo was in a particularly good mood. Only now did he find the time to talk to Shinting, who was sitting in the back seat. "See, women are all unreasonable. It was clearly your auntie who started to act like a spoiled child and interrogate her, but now she's shrinking back. It seems like it's my fault. Women are like this, you have to be careful in the future." Shinting coughed violently again. He couldn't stand it anymore. In the world of adults, apart from love, was everything so coquettish? It was full of tricks, full of things that he didn't know at his age. Shinting could only pretend that he didn't know. He was stupid. He didn't expect Qin Mo to be so open in front of him. After all, it was a private matter between husband and wife, and he was an outsider. Shinting was also a very smart person. He immediately understood why Qin Mo did not avoid him. It was because Qin Mo really regarded him as his son, so he did not avoid him. Of course, he thought that if it was a quarrel, Qin Mo wouldn't be in front of him. Adults always showed their best side to their children. After Shinting figured it out, he didn't say anything else. He just smiled. Qin Emo said a lot more, but He Huan ignored him. He was too bad. When the car arrived at the villa, Qin Emo stopped and signaled for Shinting to get out. I'll come over after talking to your aunt. You can go back and watch TV. Don't read too much. Shinting understood in his heart that it was the world of adults again. His face became thin and hot again. He didn't want to watch anymore and immediately jumped out of the car. Qin Emo waited until Shinting was far away before unfastening his seatbelt. He rubbed his chin and said to He Huan, "That child seems very uncomfortable." He Huan also unfastened her seatbelt. "I want to get out." Just as she was about to get out, Qin Emo held her hand. "Wait, I still have something to say to you." He Huan was speechless. "If you have something to say it when you're sleeping." Qin Emo ignored her and said, "Did you just say that I have a mistress?" Mrs. Qin immediately sensed danger. The more casual Qin Emo sounded, the more dangerous it was. She reached out and said in a low voice, "It's my fault. I'm sorry, Mr. Qin. Please be magnanimous." Qin Emo smiled and reached out to touch her face. "You're quite smart. You know how to please me now." The look in He Huan's eyes was indescribable, but she did not dare to do anything. Qin Emo knew when to stop. He smiled and said, "All right, I'll let you go." He Huan wanted to scold him, but he had already gotten out of the car. The way he opened the car door and got out of the car was extremely elegant and dignified. He Huan couldn't help but blush when she saw that. She was a little embarrassed. Qin Emo casually turned around and looked at her. He smiled and said, "What are you looking at? You're so engrossed that you're in a daze." He Huan came back to her senses and jogged over. She hugged his arm and leaned against him, whispering, "My first love is Mr. Qin." Qin Emo smiled. "Mr. Qin, do you know which year it was?" He Huan pursed her lips and murmured after a long time, "The year of my period. The year you fed me red beans, the year you handed me your jacket. New wife number 1, honey, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. My phone is the fastest to update." Chapter 45-78. After she said that, Qin Emo smiled. It was warm to walk with her in the dark, towards a place where there was light. Qin Emo put her down and clasped her hand with his fingers. His voice was gentler than the night. "I know." He Huan's little face blushed slightly, and then she said a little awkwardly, "You don't know." Qin Emo just smiled and didn't say anything else. He thought he understood He Huan's feelings when she was in her teens. It wasn't that she didn't like him back then, but she liked him so much that she was afraid. After all, he pampered her back then, but he was also strict. Qin Emo held her hand and said with a smile, "I will be more lenient with you in the future." He Huan's face was slightly hot, and she looked at him strangely after a while. She actually understood in her heart. After so many years, they were finally together. Yes, they were in love. He Huan felt that it was great. Under this kind of feeling, the short romance with Rong Yuk seemed so insignificant, as if it had happened in her previous life, or maybe it had never happened at all. The person she liked had always been Qin Emo. She felt sweet in her heart. When they arrived at the villa, Qin Emo asked her to watch TV with Shinting while he cooked. The servants in the house also held their breaths and watched. Qin Emo was uncomfortable. He looked up and smiled. "Why are you all looking at me? Go do what you have to do." Only then did they leave. In the living room, He Huan took off her coat and walked to the sofa. Shinting sat upright. The good-looking young man had a reserved look, and he didn't feel relaxed even when watching TV. Hee-hwan suddenly realized that he looked a lot like the young Chin Mo. The reason why Chin Mo chose Shinting was probably because of this. Because they were very similar. Hee-hwan further confirmed that Chin Mo liked Shinting from the bottom of his heart, and it wasn't just because of Hee-hwan. As she thought of this, she felt a little closer to Shinting. She felt that he could be considered her child. This child was always a little restrained, so she didn't say much and just sat side by side with him. Shinting's face was slightly red, but he still moved closer to her. Although they were 20 years apart in age, Shinting was very tall, and Hee-hwan was very young. Therefore, they didn't look like mother and son at all, but more like brother and sister. Perhaps it was Hee-hwan's imagination, but she felt that Shinting looked like a native of the Chin family. This was probably fate. After sitting with Hee-hwan for a while, Shinting finally felt that it was inappropriate for him to let Chin Mo cook for him, so he told Hee-hwan and ran to the kitchen. Chin Mo heard his footsteps and knew someone was coming, but he didn't expect it to be Shinting. Therefore, after Shinting gently and intimately poked his arm, Mr. Chin stretched out his hand and pulled Shinting into his arms. Just as he was about to kiss her, he suddenly found that the person in his arms was not Hee-hwan, but Shinting. Chin Mo was also shocked. The atmosphere was very strange. After a while, he remembered to put Shinting down and coughed lightly. "It's you." Shinting was also young, so he didn't know that there were such things between adults. He blushed and wanted to say something, but he really couldn't say anything. In the end, he actually ran away. Chin Mo was stunned for a moment before he came back to his senses. He knew that he was embarrassed, so he shook his head and smiled. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. My phone is the fastest to update. Chapter 45-79. Chin Mo was stunned for a moment before he came back to his senses. He knew that he was embarrassed, so he shook his head and smiled. Even he was shocked, not to mention Shinting. Chin Mo calmed down for a while before he recovered and continued cooking. When Shinting returned to the living room, his face was a little red. Hee-hwan noticed it too and asked curiously, "Why is your face red?" Shinting was even more embarrassed. He touched his face with his fingers. "Oh, really?" Hee-hwan reached out and touched his face. "It's still hot." Shinting, for the first time, he blushed like a little princess. Living with uncle and auntie was too exciting. It was almost 9:00 when Chin Mo finished cooking. Luckily, Hee-hwan and Shinting had eaten something to replenish their energy. Just as they were about to start eating, Chin Mo's phone rang. He picked up the phone with a smile because it was Hee-hwan's phone. However, his expression changed as soon as he picked up. Hee-hwan noticed the change in his expression and couldn't help but feel nervous. She wanted to ask, but she didn't dare. Because Chin Mo rarely had such an expression. At that moment, Chin Mo had already put down his phone. He stared at Hee-hwan for a while and said in a low voice, "Hee-hwan fell and lost a lot of blood. Let's go to the hospital now." Then, his gaze fell on Shinting's face. Shinting seemed to have guessed something. He pursed his lips and said, "I'll go with you." Chin Mo nodded. "Take your coat. I'll wait for you in the car." Although he said that, he only wore a sweater and went out. It was obvious that it was serious. When Hee-hwan and Shinting got in the car together, Chin Mo started the car without waiting for them to fasten their seatbelts. On the way, Hee-hwan was very anxious, but she didn't ask because she knew that Chin Mo was in a bad mood. He still had to drive, and he had many things to think about. At that moment, Shinting held her hand. He didn't say anything, but the youth's hand was a little warm. Huan pursed her lips and held Shinting's hand. What happened next was a little chaotic. When they arrived at the hospital, Huan was lying on the bed in the VIP ward. Her face was pale. One of her pants had been cut in half, revealing a large wound on her knee. Although it was bandaged, blood was still seeping out of the wound. This was Huan's first time seeing Huan lose blood, and her heart ached. She grabbed Qin Mo's arm. "Let me give her a blood transfusion." Qin Mo tilted his head. In fact, Huan's body wasn't very well. She had just recovered a little, so it wasn't wise to draw blood now. However, he knew that Huan really needed blood now. Therefore, even though he knew it wasn't good for Huan, he still nodded. 200, he said to the nurse, his voice hoarse as he said the time. Drawing Huan's blood was like stabbing him in the heart. It was a dull pain. The nurse frowned. The patient needs at least 600, and the hospital doesn't have such a scarce amount. Before Qin Mo could say anything, Shinting said, "Draw mine." The nurse looked at him. He's not an adult yet, so he doesn't agree with blood drawing. But right after she said that, Qin Mo said, "He's my son, draw his." Shinting had an indescribable feeling in his heart. He had a feeling that Qin Mo was insistent on drawing his blood for another reason. Although it was scarce, it wasn't impossible. 500 was indeed too much for Shinting. He was a little tired from losing so much blood, and he hadn't eaten at night. After seeing that Huan was getting better, he couldn't take it anymore and went to the ward next door to lie down. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Mobile phone updates are the fastest. Chapter 4580. To Shinting, 500 was indeed too much. The massive blood loss made him a little tired, and he hadn't eaten at night. When he saw that Huan was getting better, he couldn't take it anymore and went to the ward next door to lie down. Huan was the same. 200 was almost enough to kill her. She didn't know how long it would take for her to recuperate again. Qin Mo went to visit them and was relieved to know that they were fine. He held Huan's hand and said softly, "Rest for a while. When you're better, I'll get the nurse to send some digestible food over. Watch Shinting and eat some together. Also, don't let him visit Huan, at least tomorrow. Otherwise, he won't be able to rest well." Although Huan was weak, she still nodded. Qin Mo said a few more words in a low voice. Then, he went to look at Shinting and reached out to touch his face. After a few seconds, he went to Huan's ward. After 700 liters of blood was transfused, Huan's complexion was much better. However, she was still half awake and was still calling Xiangnan big brother. Yi Xiangnan, Yi Mubai, and Wen Yuan were all there. Regarding this accident, Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan were a little apologetic. However, they didn't say much as an apology would hurt their relationship. Yi Xiangnan sat quietly on the sofa beside the bed and stared at Huan's little face. He was actually a little scared. He couldn't imagine what would have happened to Huan if there was no blood. She had lost a lot of blood, so much that it couldn't be stopped. When he carried her into the car, Huan's little body was twitching. At that time, Yi Xiangnan's heart was shattered. Although she was clearly much better now, he still felt a little fearful and uneasy. He felt that she was very fragile and lying there like a bubble. He was even a little jealous of Shinting. He was jealous that his blood could save Huan while he could only sit there and wait. This kind of jealousy made Yi Xiannan understand what he was thinking. In his heart, there was a little fellow who looked like a doll, but her hair was cut so badly that it looked like it had been chewed by a dog. But she was still very pretty, prettier than any little girl he had ever seen. Yi Xiangnan thought that he wanted her to be his wife. However, he had Shinting now. There was a slight pain in his eyes as he reached out to hold Yi Huan's hand. He was young and had an extraordinary background. However, this was the first time that Qin Mo's arrangements had caused him to suffer a setback. He was not completely convinced, so he vented his anger on Yi Huan. But how old was Yi Huan? Other than following behind him and calling him Brother Xiangnan, what else did she know? She didn't know anything. But it was precisely because she didn't understand that he was even more worried. That was why he was even more uneasy and worried about gains and losses. It was because he wasn't the only outstanding candidate. Shinting was also outstanding and had precious blood. As Yi Xiangnan was thinking about it, the little hand in his hand moved. He quickly looked over. Yi Huan woke up and called out to him with tired eyes, "Big brother Xiangnan." These 4 words were very light, with some fear and grievance, but it was enough to make Yi Xiangnan want to cry. He held her hand tightly and said in a low voice, "Are you better?" Yi Huan buried her face in the pillow and said, "Big brother Xiangnan, can you call me baby?" She had called him Big brother Shinting once, and she felt that it was very nice. She felt like a little princess when she heard it. Yi Xiangnan was in a daze for a moment, and then he called out in a low voice. Like new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. The updates are the fastest. Chapter 4581. Yi Xiangnan was in a daze for a moment, and then he called out in a low voice. After that, he wanted to talk to her, but Yi Huan closed her eyes and fell asleep again. She actually didn't hear that baby. Yi Xiangnan was a little disappointed. After a long time, he was sure that she was really asleep. He was a little unwilling, but more than that, he just sat there, all the time. After midnight, Qin Mo still let him go to sleep. At first, Yi Xiangnan was reluctant, but Qin Mo insisted, because there was no need for one more person to watch over. Moreover, Yi Huan was fine. In the end, Yi Mubai took his son away, and he planned to come back in the morning. Only Qin Mo and a nurse were left in the ward. At 1:00 in the night, the nurse finished her work and said respectfully, "Mr. Qin, the child is fine. The doctor will come for a ward round tomorrow morning. You should rest early too." Qin Mo nodded and watched as the nurse went out and closed the door. But everyone was asleep. As a father, how could he fall asleep? Especially since Yi Huan had lost so much blood today. Just thinking about it made him feel a little scared. Qin Mo didn't want to sleep, so he kept watching over her. At about 2:00 in the night, the ward door was pushed open. Qin Mo turned his head and saw Shinting come in. Obviously, because he was the only one in the ward, Shinting seemed to heave a sigh of relief. He walked over and asked in a low voice, "How is she?" Qin Mo rubbed his sore eyes. "She should be fine. She's asleep, and after eating something tomorrow, she should be alive and kicking again." Shinting nodded and walked over to sit by the bed. He had drawn 500 blood, but now he had to get close to her. God knew that he didn't need to rest, he just wanted to be with this little person. Even if he couldn't help, he was satisfied just looking at her. Qin Mo looked at Shinting, and he sighed in his heart. He also felt a little sorry for him. Shinting might face a lot of setbacks in his relationships in the future. Now, He wondered if he was wrong to arrange for Shinting when Yi Huan liked Xiangnan and Xiangnan obviously liked Yi Huan. This was indeed torture and pain for Shinting. It was also unfair. For the first time, Qin Mo doubted himself. Yi Huan had protested many times before, but he didn't think so. Now that he saw Shinting's sad expression, he felt that he was wrong. How could he let someone else suffer the pain he had suffered once again? Qin Mo's heart was racing, but he didn't show it on his face. Coincidentally, Yi Huan came over at this moment. Her face was as pale as Shinting's. Qin Mo was a little surprised and immediately asked in a low voice, "Why are you here?" After a pause, he asked, "Have you eaten with Shinting?" Yi Huan shook her head and walked over to Shinting. Shinting said in a low voice, "She's fine." Yi Huan sat down and reached out to touch Yi Huan's little face. She stared at her for a long time. At this time, Qin Mo made a call and asked someone to send some food over. He didn't care about it at first, but now, he decided to eat with them. The food was sent over. There was food and nourishing soup. Yi Huan didn't have an appetite, but she was forced to eat some by Qin Mo. Her body was really weak, so after eating, Qin Mo fed her half a sleeping pill and carried her to the ward next door to let her rest. Like new wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 4582. After the meal, Qin Mo fed her half a sleeping pill and carried her to the ward next door so that she could have a good rest. When he came back, he still had a headache because there was still one that refused to leave. Qin Mo walked over and patted him on the shoulder. He said in a low voice, "I'll be fine. You go with your auntie. She took sleeping pills, and I don't feel at ease leaving her there alone." Of course, it was just an excuse. He just didn't want Shinting to work too hard. After all, he had just drawn so much blood. In fact, Qin Mo did have other ways. Shinting wasn't the only one who had blood, but he wanted Shinting to remember this day and this painful moment. Because love was often painful before it was obtained. It was just like how he felt for Yi Huan. Qin Mo wanted to say something, but today wasn't the time. Maybe he could talk to Shinting tomorrow or the day after. After he said that, Shinting replied softly, "I want to stay with her." Qin Mo thought for a while and agreed. "If you can't take it, go to sleep. You can't force yourself, understand?" Shinting nodded. Qin Mo didn't force him. He went to see Yi Huan for a while and then came back. Shinting stubbornly stayed with Yi Huan, as if he was holding on to that tiny bit of hope. Even he knew that it was very slim. He still stayed with her and waited stubbornly. Many years later, Shinting would sit alone in the CEO's office and think about whether his choice was right or wrong. No matter what he thought later, at this moment, he truly loved this little girl. Late at night, Shinting couldn't bear to close his eyes. He had waited so long for this opportunity. He could only stay by Yi Xiannan's side when she was not around. Just like the relationship between the three of them, Shinting was just a substitute. He didn't feel so bad in the past, but when Yi Huan was lying here with someone else by her side, he felt really bad. Shinting had to suppress his discomfort, or he would lose his composure. A 13-year-old boy would always have his own pride. Shinting stayed by her side until around 4:00 in the evening, when even Qin Mo couldn't take a nap anymore. Yi Huan woke up and opened her eyes. Under the warm light, a familiar face was placed on the edge of her pillow. Yi Huan subconsciously called out, "Brother Xiangnan." Shinting's heart ached. Even when she was half awake, she was still thinking about Yi Xiangnan. He was upset, but he didn't show it on his face. He didn't want to disappoint her, so he was willing to let her misunderstand. Shinting nodded and reached out to gently touch her forehead. "Baby, do you want to eat something?" Little Yi Huan's face was white, but her eyes were especially bright, just like a newborn chick, fresh, tender and cute. She murmured, "Gidge, call me Bao Bao." Shinting's heart ached again, but his voice was extremely gentle as he said, "From now on, Big Brother will call you like this, okay?" The little girl nodded obediently. Actually, Shinting was already very tired, but because she was awake, he suddenly became energetic. He said in a low voice, "I'll feed you some red bean soup, okay?" It was originally for Yi Huan, but Yi Huan didn't like it, so he didn't touch it and kept it in the thermos. At this time, he could give some to Yi Huan. After he said that, little Yi Huan's face was full of horror, like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to spoiling. Play bar updates the fastest. Chapter 4583. Just like Yi Huan didn't like to eat it. She sat at the head of the bed and stared at Shinting with a pained expression. "I don't want to eat this." Shinting was stunned for a moment before he understood. She had inherited Yi Huan's preferences. However, even though she didn't like it, Shinting still coaxed her. After a long time, Yi Huan bit her lips and gave in. Moreover, she didn't treat him as Yi Xiangnan anymore. She naturally called him Brother Shinting. Shinting said in a low voice, "Eat some. Be good." Yi Huan waited obediently for him to feed her. Shinting smiled, but there was some bitterness in his smile. This was something that little Yi Huan couldn't understand. Yi Huan's attention was focused on the bitterness in her mouth. Just like Yi Huan, she felt that it was especially bitter. It was as bitter as if her life was being taken away. However, since it was Big Brother Shinting who fed her, she still drank it obediently. Big Brother Shinting looked very worried. Yi Huan looked at him as she drank the red beans mouthful by mouthful. Because it was hot, even though it tasted bad, it was really comfortable in her stomach. Although Yi Huan had replenished the blood she had lost, her body was still very weak. She leaned against the pillow lightly and opened her eyes wide. "Brother, can you tell me a story?" She called him brother again. Shinting didn't care anymore. He was tired and sleepy, but he wanted to accompany her. Thus, he rested his head on the side of her pillow and told her a story softly. What Yi Huan didn't know was that Shinting had bought a thick book of fairy tales and finished them in one night. Thus, he told a few stories in a row, some of which Yi Huan had never heard before. Her eyes were wide open, and her palm-sized face was full of admiration. "Brother, you're amazing." Even though it was a very simple sentence, Shinting's heart felt warm and indescribable. He raised his head slightly and looked at Yi Huan. Yi Huan also looked at him, not knowing what she had done wrong. After a long time, Shinting finally said in a low voice, "I hope that when you grow up, you can always say this to me." Because of what she said, Shinting used all his strength to become the CEO of King Group at the age of 28, not just King Entertainment. At that time, Qin Mo had almost retired to the second tier, and the entire company was handed over to Shinting. Later, when Yi Huan was 24 years old, which was Shinting's 30, Yi Huan took over King Group, but Shinting still held the power. At that time, it was not impossible for him to fight for the throne. However, Shinting had always been the CEO. The man standing in front of Qin Yi Huan. But at this moment, it was the time when the two of them were innocent. However, the male and female leads were Qin Yi Huan and Yi Xiangnan. Not him, Enchanting. He was willing to play a supporting role and enjoy this stolen moment. This quiet, beautiful, and painful moment finally ended because of Yi Huan's exhaustion. The little girl yawned and said in a low voice, "I want to sleep, brother." As soon as she said that, her eyes closed, and her little face fell on the pillow. She actually fell asleep just like that. Enchanting didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he also felt a little heartache. Actually, he was also extremely tired, but he had been holding on. Now that she was asleep, it was also a kind of relief for him, but in his heart, he still felt a little reluctant. Like new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Play bar updates the fastest. Chapter 4584. Now that she was asleep, it was a form of relief for him. But in his heart, he couldn't bear to let her go. The young man endured it for a long time, but he still couldn't help but reach out a finger to touch her face. Yi Huan's long eyelashes fluttered, and she murmured. Although it was blurry, Enchanting could hear it clearly. It was Big Brother Xiangnan. His heart ached, and there was a great sense of confusion, but this feeling only lasted for about a minute. He smiled slightly and gently touched her short hair. Although it was short, it was surprisingly soft, just like Yi Huan. It was especially soft and cute. Before Enchanting could retract his hand, Qin Mo's voice sounded behind him. "She's asleep." Enchanting was a little embarrassed. After all, he had touched her. He lowered his head and hummed in acknowledgement. Qin Mo guessed that he was embarrassed and smiled. "Go and sleep for a while. I'll wake you up later." Enchanting nodded and agreed. He went to the ward next door. Exhausted, he couldn't sleep for the whole night. On this night, Yi Huan had a strange and dazzling dream. When she woke up, she forgot everything that happened last night. She forgot that Enchanting had fed her, and she forgot that Enchanting had told her many stories. She forgot that it was Enchanting who had spent this dark night with her. Because when she woke up in the morning, Yi Xiangnan's handsome face was right next to her pillow. "Big Brother Xiangnan," Yi Huan's voice was soft, and there was a hint of surprise in it. "Did you spend the whole night with me?" Before Yi Xiangnan could say anything, Yi Huan said sweetly, "I missed you so much, Big Brother Xiangnan." The little person became spoiled because she was hurt. Usually, Yi Xiangnan still had the temperament of a rich young master, and he always felt a little distant. But today, Yi Huan didn't care. The sick person was the most important. Her little body no longer felt uncomfortable. She flew into Yi Xiangnan's arms and acted like a spoiled child. Yi Xiangnan hugged him and felt that the little guy in his arms had a smell of medicine, as well as a special milky scent that children had. This smell was indescribably comfortable and at ease. Thus, he forgot about the matter that he originally wanted to deny. She silently acknowledged the fact that he had accompanied her for the entire night. As they hugged, Enchanting stood quietly at the door, his good-looking face expressionless. He wasn't angry, nor was he disappointed. It was just indifferent, as if he had already thought of what would happen. Yi Huan watched from the side and patted his shoulder lightly. "You can tell her." Enchanting's gaze was still on Yi Huan and Yi Xiangnan. After a while, he said softly, "Auntie, don't say anything. I don't want to change her mind because of something else." He liked Yi Huan, but he wanted her to be happy. It wasn't because of how much blood Enchanting had drawn for her. If a relationship had to be conditional, it would be an insult to love. Yi Huan felt a little sorry for Enchanting. She wanted to say something, but Shinting said in a low voice, "I'm going to ask the doctor about something." After saying that, he left. And He Huan could only sigh. Qin Mo was also there. In fact, such an outcome was expected. In fact, this was also fair to Yi Xiangnan because Yi Huan lived with Shinting every day. When Shinting returned from abroad, Yi Huan would be in puberty, and Yi Xiangnan would probably be busy with the business of Stars Entertainment every day. New wife number 1, husband, I'm addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, husband, I'm addicted to spoiling. The updates were the fastest. Chapter 4585. Qin Mo was also there. In fact, this result was expected. In fact, it was also fair to Yi Xiangnan because Yi Huan lived with Shinting every day. When Shinting came back from abroad, Yi Huan would be in puberty, and Yi Xiangnan would probably be busy with the business of Stars Entertainment. This starting point was fair to them. However, Yi Huan didn't think so. In her heart, Shinting was already a child of her family, and she was always biased. Yi Huan was a little dissatisfied. Afterward, she complained to Qin Mo, "Didn't Yi Huan know? Didn't you hurt Shinting's heart? This child is mature and sensible, but she must be sad." Regarding this, Qin Mo only said that he respected Shinting's decision. Seeing that Yi Huan still wasn't convinced, he smiled. "You don't know. This is a man's pride. Only women care about this." Yi Huan looked at him suspiciously. Qin Mo smiled. "You don't understand the world of men." Yi Huan was speechless, but there was nothing she could do. Qin Mo was right about one thing. It was that Shinting was proud. Later, Yi Huan talked to Shinting for a while, and indeed, men understood men. Later, she didn't say anything, but she knew that from then on, Shinting would draw 100 milliliters of blood and put it in the blood bank every month. Later, when he went abroad to study, he would come back every 2 months to draw 300 milliliters of blood. Therefore, the blood that Yi Huan used was all Shinting's, including one time when she bled heavily and used 2,000 milliliters. It was all the blood that was drawn from Shinting's body. At this time, Shinting came back from the doctor's office. Yi Huan was accompanied by Yi Xiangnan. When the door of the ward opened, Yi Huan looked up and saw Shinting. She called her brother, very cheerfully. At least, she was happier than last night. Shinting thought that it was probably because Yi Xiangnan was with her now, so she was in a particularly good mood. Shinting smiled and didn't mention last night. He just stood by the bed and reached out to touch her little head. "Are you better?" Yi Huan sweetly said, "Much better, Gidge. I dreamed of eating red beans." She stuck out her tongue. "It's really disgusting." Shinting's facial muscles twitched slightly. After a moment, he smiled. "Red beans are good for blood." Yi Xiannan looked at Shinting thoughtfully, and had a rough idea of what was going on. However, he didn't expose her. With Yi Xiangnan around, Shinting felt that it was a little boring to stay, so he let out a sigh of relief. "It's good that you're fine. I'll go back first. I still have some homework." Yi Huan was reluctant and a little disappointed. "Brother Shinting, you just got here and you're leaving." After she finished speaking, Shinting stared at her with a strange gaze. It was the same for Yi Xiangnan. After a long time, Shinting smiled and said, "I'm going home tomorrow. Be good and rest well." He paused for a moment. "Otherwise, I'll have to drink red beans again." Yi Huan's face was filled with disdain. Shinting smiled very faintly and didn't say anything more. Later, he went out first. Qin Mo arranged a car to send him back, mainly because Shinting really needed to rest. Yi Xiangnan caught up with Shinting at the door. Wait a minute. Shinting stopped. He turned his head and looked at Yi Xiangnan, the only male member of the noble Yi family. As long as he was willing, he was a boy with a bright future in politics or business. The only thing that Shinting envied about him was that Yi Xiangnan was Yi Huan's brother Xiangnan. He worked hard and adapted to his circumstances. But now, Shinting didn't have the qualification to adapt to his circumstances. He wasn't outstanding enough. Even mentioning that he liked him would be an insult to himself. Like new wife number 1, husband, addicted to spoiling. Please collect, new wife number 1, husband, addicted to spoiling. Play bar is the fastest to update. Chapter 4586. The two equally good-looking and outstanding boys sized each other up. The long corridor of the hospital was dead silent. After a long time, Yi Xiangnan finally said, "Why didn't you tell her?" At this moment, he was so calm that he didn't look like a jealous young man in the mall at all. Instead, he looked like a thoughtful adult. Shinting never dared to underestimate Yi Xiangnan, so he wasn't surprised that he would say this. He looked at Yi Xiangnan and lowered his voice slightly. There's no difference whether I tell her or not. She never lacks people who donate blood or can accompany her. Those things can be done by volunteers and nurses, so it doesn't matter to me whether she knows or not. Even if she knows, she will at most rely on me a little, and that isn't a good thing for me, Yi Xiangnan, right? Before, Yi Xiangnan had underestimated him, but now he didn't dare to think like this at all. Although the education that Shinting received was different from his, it didn't mean that Shinting wasn't as outstanding as him. On the contrary, he was more mature. The two teenagers looked at each other for a long time. Finally, Shinting spoke first. Take good care of her. He turned around and left. His slender figure of more than 170 centimeters was very handsome. Yi Xiangnan stared at his back for a while before raising his voice. I don't believe that you're so generous. Shinting paused, and a moment later, his voice was heard. She has to go home eventually. The person who spends time with her every day is me. Yi Xiangnan thought about his words and then said mockingly, home. Shinting, you can never be a family with her. At most, you'll be the highest level worker in the Qin family. If you don't believe me, we'll see. Shinting lowered his eyes and smiled faintly. He didn't pay attention to him and left directly. Yi Xiangnan stood where he was and looked at Shinting's back. He was a little annoyed. It seemed that he had won, but in fact, had he? No, Shinting was very calm from the beginning to the end. It was Yi Xiangnan who was in a difficult situation. He could not keep his cool. He was very impetuous. Initially, he had not thought much of Shinting. But now, he no longer saw it that way. Their starting line was actually about the same. The Qin family no longer only had King Entertainment, but a very large financial group. As for him, Yi Xiangnan, if he did not want to lose, he had to run hard. A child born into a wealthy family was easier to understand than the average person, and it was easier to accept in human torment. Yi Xiangnan stood there for a long time. When he returned to the ward, Yi Huan was sitting on the pink bed, wearing a set of pink pajamas. He was stunned for a moment before he remembered that Yi Huan hadn't worn pink for a long time. She kept saying that she wanted to learn from Aunt Qin, but now she obviously wanted to wear a dress. Yi Xiangnan thought that Shinting must have changed her. There was something in his mind, but he walked straight to her and said in a low voice, "Don't you want to sleep for a while?" As he spoke, He sat down and ran his fingers through her short hair. Yi Xiangnan sighed softly. He thought that he liked her, very much. There was still at least 10 years before she grew up, but he was sure that he would always like her. As for Yi Huan, he did not know. She was still a child and had not settled down. She called him Big Brother Xiangnan, and she also called him Big Brother Shenting. And who was the disappointment in her eyes? Who was she wearing a dress and long hair for? Yi Xiangnan did not dare to think about it. New wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. The error-free chapter will continue to be updated on handheld bar. There will be no advertisements on the site. Please bookmark and recommend handheld bar. New wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Handheld bar was the fastest to update. Chapter 4587. Yi Xiangnan didn't dare to think about it. But he didn't want to. Yi Huan's expression was very clear. She raised her little head and asked him, "Did you see Brother Shenting? Is he angry?" "I think he's angry with me." The string in Yi Xiannan's heart snapped in an instant. He thought to himself, as expected. In Yi Huan's heart, he and Shenting were the same. She was too young, and he couldn't force her to know the difference between the two feelings. He only knew that he was crazy jealous at this time and very uncomfortable, but he could only endure it. If Shenting could endure it, so could he, Yi Xiangnan. Probably because his expression was too ugly, Yi Huan noticed it and asked softly, "Brother Xiangnan, are you angry too?" "No," he replied, but his voice was always stiff. Yi Huan looked at him for a long time, and then suddenly burst into tears. Brother Xiangnan and Brother Shenting didn't like the baby anymore. Yi Huan felt that she didn't do anything wrong. She was so seriously injured, and she was very obedient. Why were they angry? Yi Huan cried very hard, and her voice was loud. Yi Xiangnan pursed his lips, and there was a little annoyance on his face. If it was in the past, he would coax her well, but today, because of Shenting, he was annoyed. In the end, it was the father who coaxed his little daughter. Yi Xiangnan stayed for a while to make sure she was okay and then left. When he left, the 12-year-old boy was a little overwhelmed, because he had nowhere to put his feelings. The 12-year-old Yi Xiangnan couldn't deal with such complicated feelings. If it wasn't for Shenting, he could slowly grow up or spoil Yi Huan like a princess. But now, Yi Xiangnan was caught off guard. He clearly knew that she liked him in her heart, even if it was from a child's mouth, but he still affected her. Shenting was right. Shenting and Qin Yi Huan were together every day. Yi Xiangnan suddenly had nowhere to put his feelings, and he needed to adjust. He knew in his heart that he had lost, so it was very ungentlemanly. Yi Xiangnan closed the door at the door and then opened it. Yi Huan was lying on Qin Mo's shoulder, and her little body was twitching. Yi Xiangnan's heart ached. It was his own fault that he couldn't adjust his emotions, but he vented his anger on Yi Huan, the little girl he loved. Yi Xiannan slowly walked over until his face was level with Yi Huan's. He called out to her softly. Yi Huan's little head immediately hooked up, her big watery and tender eyes staring at him, and she even unconsciously called out, "Big Brother Nan." Yi Xiannan picked her up and patted her. "It's my fault." Then, the little guy burst into tears again. Yi Xiangnan coaxed the little guy for a long time. After about half a day, the little guy finally stopped crying. Towards this, he was also very helpless. Later, Yi Huan stayed in the hospital for another day. After that, she did not go home directly. Instead, she was picked up by the Yi family and stayed for a week. Yi Huan was dissatisfied with this arrangement. On the day that Yi Huan went to the Yi family, she and Qin Mo had a big fight. Originally, she needed to care about Shinting's existence, but most of her anger was because of Shinting. Therefore, the quarrel was very fierce. Shinting, who also lived on the second floor, could naturally hear it. He slowly put down the book in his hand, his face expressionless. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.